Hello and welcome to FinextraTV's Thought Leadership Series. I'm Hannah Wallace, and kindly joining us on the call today is Paul Taylor, Head of Financial Institutions GTS at Bank of America. Hello, Paul, it's lovely to see you. Thanks for joining.
Morning, Hannah. Great to see you.
Now, I know we'd be face-to-face in the studio normally, but we're calling in to hear how you're getting on during this unprecedented time, because I'm sure you've had clients calling in and asking for advice. So how are you reassuring them?
Well, as you know, Hannah, financial institutions support some of the biggest economies and some of the biggest corporations around the world. And so working as a network of financial institutions, we've been very focused over the last few weeks in ensuring that we can continue to provide that service to each other and to those end clients. In that regard, I would say that we've been offering our clients three pieces of core advice. Number one is to seek stability. At a time like this, our underlying clients want to know that there is stability in terms of technology, stability in terms of risk management, stability in terms of business continuity, whether that's systems, services, processes, the ability to make approvals, for example, and stability from a credit and liquidity risk perspective. And we've seen a huge spike in payment operations, but also a huge spike in client balances over the last week as our clients have sought stability. So stability is number one. Number two is to increase communication. We've probably heard from our clients more than we've ever heard from them before over the last few weeks. Client calls year on year are up almost 25% versus this time last year. And that just reflects the fact that all of us are making a much more determined effort to keep in touch. So we have been making a much more concerted, a much more determined effort to keep in touch, to make sure our clients are safe, but also to make sure that they are able to perform the functions that they need to perform for their clients and that we can support them in doing so. The last piece of advice I would offer is go digital. We have seen over the last few weeks a massive increase in wire payments, in international wires, in electronic ACH payments. We've also seen a massive spike in interest in using digital documentation, digital onboarding, in using digital signatures rather than wet signatures. And that, of course, is a necessity born by the circumstances that we're living in. But I would say that our advice to clients right now is to focus on digital means of doing business.
All right, well, that sounds pretty reassuring, actually, and leads me quite nicely into my next question, is how they're managing sort of the practical side of things as they move away from the physical elements, such as paper-based contracts.
Yeah.
Are you finding some difficulties in this area?
We've seen, not really difficulty, we've just seen a transition. Mm-hmm. Clients that previously would have onboarded with wet signatures, with paper copies of their documentation, with an exchange of documentation which was based on, quite frankly, a legacy process, have very quickly become interested in the idea of digital onboarding, digital signatures, digital submission. We've seen, as I said, we've seen a reduction in paper instruments, where previously clients were still keen to support checks and cash letters. We've actually seen a massive move towards wires and towards electronic ACH payments. In fact, at the beginning of the crisis, from a Western Hemisphere perspective 4 weeks ago, we saw one of the biggest ever spikes we've seen in electronic wires and international wires. The last thing I would say is that with this crisis, obviously central banks and governments have had to react. There has been a monetary reaction and there has been a fiscal reaction as well. And obviously with that, we've seen a number of different major economies cut their interest rates. And so one of the practical things that's happened is that the underlying clients, the large corporates, have been drawing down their revolver facilities because they want to secure their working capital through this crisis, however long that may be. And they've been looking for safe havens in which to park that liquidity. And so we've seen a huge spike in balances. And that, I would say, has been a practical reaction to the crisis as well, albeit not along the digital line, but it's a different form of practical reaction.
All right, that's interesting, because with this focus on technology and an increase in digital payments, we're looking at maybe a cashless society in the future, because we were talking about that before, but maybe this crisis has sort of signaled the end of cash. What do you think?
It's a great question. I think you look at cash two ways. You look at it on one hand as a security, something which is of tangible value, or you look at it as a means of payment. As a security, I would argue, it's actually increased in prominence over the last few weeks. We, of course, have a fantastic global wholesale banknotes business, and we've actually seen an increase in demand from economies all over the world because their underlying clients are looking to get their hands on cash. And so as a security, as a bearer of value, cash has probably increased in significance because it's perceived by the man on the street to be a haven. As a means of payment, though, I would say exactly the opposite. I think from a consumer level, we've seen a spike in contactless payments, no surprise. I think we've seen a spike in online commerce in all descriptions, mainly grocery, but frankly, for all of our needs, we've all gone online. And of course, that leads us to use either card-based payments or digital wallets. So we've seen a huge spike in that. And yes, I think it's possible that as a result of this crisis, people will change their behaviors long-term because they've learned that actually these digital wallets and these electronic means of payment are just as viable, just as attractive, but come with the added bonus that they are not physical at a time when we cannot literally exchange.
Mm-hmm. And this isn't the only area where we're seeing behaviours change. And I know for certain that Finextra is getting a lot of traction around sustainable finance. We're covering a lot of stories around that, especially in a time like this. It's becoming more important, sort of sustainable investing. Do you think that financial institutions are changing the way they manage their ESG contributions? And do you think it's more of a priority now?
I don't know if it's more of a priority, Hannah, but I would say that, if anything, this crisis has made ESG something which could have been theoretical and could have been something which was designed to enhance a brand, to actually being something very practical and very necessary. And for banks, that's come in lots of different ways. The first obvious way is the way in which a bank like ours is required to support the government programs which are intended to get finance to consumers and to small businesses. And of course, with the US CARES Act, we were the first bank to go online with our ability to support. And we've seen an unbelievable amount of requests for that financing. And that required us to be able to support that. We've supported 66 million consumers and small businesses through our client assistance program, which we set up in response to this crisis. That's a different form of ESG. It's not the ESG we're used to, but again, it's societal. It's about supporting the society, and it's very real. And of course, we support charity. We dedicated pretty early in this crisis $100 million in support for charitable organizations, not just in the US, but around the world. Here in the UK, in Asia and beyond, we have set aside $100 million, which is being used practically today. I think one of the other interesting aspects, which Hannah, you will relate to, is the fact that we've all ended up making the planet a little greener as a result of this crisis. We're taking less planes, we're traveling less, we are exchanging less documentation, less physical material. And as a result, whether deliberately or not, the world is a little bit greener as a result.
Well, that's great to hear what Bank of America have been doing with their contributions. And I suppose to end really, and what everyone will be asking is what the future is going to look like in terms of the market and the way we work. It's hard to imagine, but do you think we'll go back to normal, or are we looking at the new normal?
Again, great question. I think the answer lies somewhere in the middle. I find it hard to believe that we will go back to what we used to call business as usual. I think we have all, as we're doing right now, Hannah, proven that we can work from home. with the dogs barking and the children screaming, but we still get stuff done. The economy still moves, transactions still get made, and the economies still are able to function because we've all demonstrated that the digital technology that we have allows us to do this remotely. I do think there will be a massive move towards virtual. We're seeing a number of major industry events and industry conferences being cancelled this year. Most of those events will move to some form of online or virtual participation. I think we will see the same for client meetings. I think we will see the same for client pitches. I said a moment ago, I anticipate that we will all be traveling a lot less than we did in the past. And I think possibly one of the best things about the new normal, as you call it, is that we've all got a significantly greater appreciation of personal well-being. And I think that we will all personally, and as employees of large companies, I think there will be a much greater emphasis on personal well-being and what it takes to ensure that personal well-being, because we've all seen the flip side of that over the last 5 to 6 weeks in Europe and the US, and of course over the last 12 weeks in Asia. So I do think that the workplace of the future will have a much greater emphasis on personal well-being.
Yes, and as you say, here we are, adapting. Paul, I could talk to you for a lot longer, but we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining in today.
Thank you.